When was the last time you felt represented within your Congress? And when was the last time that you trusted the government to ensure your general safety and security? How important is representation to you? The average age of the Senate is 63 years old. The average age of the House is 58. The average American is 38 years old. So, what does this mean? It means that so many generations do not have representation within both the Congress House and Congress Senate. Seeing yourself and your generational interests represented is a super important part of being a democracy. Without that representation, many voices go unheard. Who is in Congress? So, as of 2019, let's see. As of 2019, the the oldest person within Congress was born in 1929. That was almost 100 years ago. They are fairly represented by having 18% of excuse me of the Senate and 6% of the House. The Boomer generation has 53 in the House, 68 in the Senate. Gen X has 33% in the House and 20% in Senate. Millennial has 7% in the House and 1% in the Senate. Gen Z isn't even represented yet. This is important because that means that people my age, people older than me by 20 years, they're not getting represented and their interests are not being pursued. They're being blocked by older generations who have a grossly overrepresentation within our government. One thing I think is important to look at is what happened in the backgrounds of the generations that are in the Senate. For the silent generation, the one before boomers, uh, segregation was still enacted, and it didn't end until they had reached adulthood in 1948. For the boomers, it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, Civil Rights Movement, and the Vietnam War. For Gen X, it was the fall of the Berlin Wall, Jonestown mass suicide, the Watergate scandal, and the stock market decline. For millennials, it was 9/11, wars with Iraq and Afghanistan, and the stock market crash. It's important to look at these specific instances in their background because it affects how they view things and react to things as an adult. For boomers, especially with their overrepresentation, many of them fought against the civil rights movement. Many of them were for the Vietnam War. And watching the way that they've been handling policies in the past 10 years alone, you can see the influence from those times affecting the ones today. Their political alliances. Now, the silent generation is mostly Republican. That's hardly news. The boomers, although they swing more on a slight Democratic side, they're more Republican than anything. Millennials and Gen X are far to the left on the Democratic side as opposed to the Republican side. That's important because since the boomers make up such a huge portion of both the House and the Senate, they're able to block and promote their own policies, which would go directly against the interests of the Gen X and millennial interests. So for a solution, I suggest looking at the comparison between the age differences in America and the ones overseas. Specifically, South Africa, they have a very high difference within ages and way more diversity when it comes to each generation, as well as prime ministers, MPs, parliament members. They're all a very good variety of different generations, making up only 30% of the South African Congress as opposed to the 60% of our Congress. Seeing the differences and how their policies are affected by the younger generational interests, it's very easy to see where we're being blocked as Americans by the overrepresentation of boomers and silent generation. Excuse me. To summarize, boomers are grossly overrepresented within our Congress, while three generations after them have little to no representation. Without an age limit, there will continue to be issues where boomers will overpower the other generations and block further progress from being made. To be able to stop this, we can vote for younger representatives. We can also demand that an age limit be set upon Congress to block these issues from happening again. So again, I'll ask you, when was the last time you felt represented? When did you feel that your safety and security were taken into consideration when Congress made a decision? When you demand more representation, you give yourself the ability to make sure that you are taken care of.